Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. This week on the Ferguson Home, we're talking about sex and how you should talk to your kids about that topic.
Hey, welcome back to the Ferguson Home. We are so glad you're with us this week. We have done a couple of videos on our YouTube channel about sex within the marriage relationship. But today we want to talk about how do you talk to your kids about sex. And so this is an area that Barie and I have invested a lot of time and energy to think about. And we've talked to our kids and we've talked to other parents. And so we want to speak to you parents out there and to you teenagers out there about how do you have this conversation between parents and kids about sexuality. Now, again, we want to give credit where credit is due. A lot of the ideas that we're going to share with you today are not original to us. They've come from a couple, Stan and Brenna Jones. Stan and Brenna Jones have been instrumental in putting together a whole series of books with Nav Press called God's Design for Sex.
I actually have, sorry, I'm going to cut out right here. I have two of them.
Man, look at you.
I'm on top of it.
Sorry, so God's Design for Sex starts with these books that are these little ones for children.
Let's see, this is book one.
The Story of Me is the first one.
And it says, let me show you right here. It says the ages 3 to 5. If you can see that. I don't know if you can see that or not. We always err on the later side. And so like this one, we would read, I just read this one to our 6-year-old. I read it to him last year when he was 5. Mm-hmm. So just so you know kind of where we fall on that.
And then the second book is called Before I Was Bored, okay? And so they say on here ages 5 to 8. Again, we kind of go on the end of that spectrum, 7 or 8 years old. And then there's a third book that is a book that you read with your pre-adolescent child, so right in the like preteen, early teen years. And then there's a final book that's more of a chapter book that's all about sexuality for teenagers. Now, Stan and Brenna have also written a book for parents, and that's really what we want to focus on today.
Yeah.
They've written a book for parents called How and When to Tell Your Kids About Sex. And this book, I think, is so important. It's just been updated. I just saw that they released a new edition of it. And so we want to give you a few of the things we've learned from that book that we've applied in our own family that will help you as you talk to your kids about sex. And I just want to say this just right off the bat, okay? First of all, I know, and I've heard Stan talk about this issue, that so many parents are uncomfortable talking to their kids about sex. And there's a number of reasons for that. But the main issue here is parents, we want to encourage you. God put you in your child's life to talk to them about their sexuality. And so I just want to especially say to the dads, hey, you've got to get over the fear, the embarrassment, the shame you feel from your past, the awkwardness of having a conversation with your sons about sex, and you've got to do it. Like, you have got to take that role as a father, as a mother, to have these conversations with your kids, because listen, they are stepping into a world of all kind of sexual confusion, and there are all these messages everywhere. There's pornography everywhere, and so if you don't equip them for this, you are sending them into the world completely unprepared. And so you can tell we have a lot of passion around this topic, and it's because we see so many kids and so many teenagers who are unprepared, and that's because parents are not taking the initiative to have these conversations with their kids.
And here's my deal that I always tell parents. If you don't tell them and you are waiting like, oh, they're too innocent and I'm going to wait, your silence communicates to your kids that you don't know anything about the topic. Mm-hmm. So the longer that they think that, the more that when you do come and talk to them, they're not going to take you seriously. So that helps to lead into what is our first tip that we give parents usually.
So first tip, and we already kind of mentioned it about the ages that are mentioned on these books, but that is you need to have these conversations with your kids earlier than you think that you do. And so we talk to a lot of parents who have like middle school kids and they've not had any conversations with their children about sex.
And they'll say, my kid is so innocent. Like that would just freak them out if we brought that up.
Yeah, they've never heard anything about these topics. That's right. I don't want to be the one to introduce these subjects to them. And Barie and I are just shaking our heads at those parents saying, you are just sticking your head in the sand and not realizing the world that your kids are growing up in. Even if you're homeschooling, even if you're private schooling your kids, if your kids are ever anywhere in this culture, if they're around any children anywhere outside of your home, if they go out into the public spaces, into the mall, if they go online at any time, listen, they are going to interact with ideas around sex.
And here's the deal. If you, even if you homeschool them and they have access to any kind of internet, right? And they hear a word somewhere, they hear the word sex, they hear the word masturbate, they hear the word pornography, any of those words, what they're going to go to is not you. If you've never brought it up, they're going to go to Google, and Google is going to show them a lot of different images that you do not want them to see. So if they're just innocent saying, what is porn, right? Or put in the word that they've heard, enter, it's going to come up with a lot of stuff that you would rather them not see. And that is where they're going to go. If they don't go to their friend, they're going to go to the internet. And so you've got to be the one. You've got to be their Google.
That's right. Yeah, and the internet just has so many confusing messages and so much just graphic material that you don't want your kids getting involved with. And so if they're not going to go there and they hear something they're not sure about, where are they going to go? To their friends, to their peers, okay?
What do we say about their friends?
And we say all the time to our kids, we say, listen, if you have a question about a word you hear you don't understand, or a topic is being discussed and you're confused about it, come talk to your parents, because your friends are idiots, because they don't know anything about sex. And that's what's so true, right? Whether they have just been educated through media or through online or whatever, they don't know anything about sex and how it actually works in relationships. And so we tell our kids, come to us. And so here's what we want to say. Tell them earlier than you think that they need to know. And so start this conversation. As we said, you want to talk about marriage. You want to talk about pregnancy. You want to talk about how babies are born early, right? And then even before they hit puberty, you want to introduce intercourse. You want to talk about all the body parts. You want to talk about how sex in marriage works, how God designed it. So a holistic view of sexuality that you can give to your kids. And it's so important you do that before they hit puberty, because if you wait until they hit puberty and then you have all these conversations, it is awkward, right? Because all the hormones are raging. If you have the conversations before that, it's just like you're explaining something that's natural that they need to know about.
And we have different personalities. Our first kid was like, tell me more. Can I have that book to read it on my own? And he was putting two and two together about different things.
Is this what mom and dad do?
Yeah. So that was kid number one. Kid number two, we read, book 2, I think, to him. And he's like, and I'm done. I don't have any questions. This is weird. Don't talk to me anymore. That's right. And of course, we still push past and ask questions, but just know, don't shut down. If your first kid is one that is embarrassed by the topic, just make a joke about it and keep going on.
That's right. And besides these books, which are a great resource to you as a parent, the other resource, and we've recommended this on a previous Ferguson Home video, is the Passport to Purity material by Family Life Ministries. And so if you're like, well, I don't know what to say or which things to bring up as they go into puberty, and I don't know how to talk about peer pressure, I don't know how to talk about dating, and all these things they need to know about, listen, Dennis and Barbara Rainey have got you covered, right? And so you just take those CDs from them, they're going to cover all those topics, but you get to host the weekend with your teenager, with your preteen, and help walk them through all that. Now, we do that before they go into middle school. Again, back to our principle, have the conversations earlier than you think you need to, right? So just do it early so that they are equipped and prepared whenever they actually experience that. And here's what you want to have. You want them to understand that you, as the parents, are the subject matter expert, okay? And that what that means is that you want them to go into school, you want them to go into the neighborhood, you want them to go to church, and when they hear from one of their friends a word or an idea, them say, hey, you know what? Mom and dad already explained this to me. I already know about this. You want them to be equipped, but you also want them to be equipped from you. So that when they hear something, they have a question, they come back to mom and dad and they say, hey, I heard about this. What is this? Can you explain this to me?
Okay, this is a second. I have to tell this story. Do you remember when, Cade, you were driving in the car coming back, I think from Taco Bueno? I wasn't in there, but I could tell it had an effect on you when we got home. And he said, Dad, what is, and it was F-U-C-K. Dad, and he was young, right? Like he was in elementary school. So I'm just saying, start him out young. He's like, hey, Dad, what is the F word? But he said it.
He said it like 5 or 6 times in a row.
Keith was like, I'm sorry, what did you say? Thinking he'd heard him wrong. He kept saying it, and Keith's like, well, first stop saying it. But you have to learn to poker face, so don't freak out, because that will shut him down. And so props to you. I think you kept it cool. Did tell him, hey, let's don't repeat that word again. I got it. I'll explain it to you. It's, not appropriate. But just, you want to because you want them to come to you, you're going to have to really practice not responding out of fear, not panicked. Don't let them read you at all. You play it cool and be like, okay, let's talk about it, you know?
Absolutely. And so another point here when you talk to your kids about sex is I think a lot of parents are fearful because they have things in their own past with their own sexuality that they're embarrassed about. Yeah. And so they feel like, well, who am I to tell my kid to do this or not to do this because I messed this up when I was young. And that's totally understandable that we all have brokenness in our sexuality. But here's what's so important. We are not appealing to our authority. We're not appealing to our experience. We're appealing to God's authority and His Word and what He says about sexuality. And what we're also sharing, instead of feeling shame about our past, we need to be open and honest about our past to our kids and say, hey, this is where I went off the rails with my own sexuality. This is what I did in relationships or with pornography or whatever's in your story. And this is what happened. This is what I experienced. And so, I think a lot of parents are that they feel embarrassed by their story and by their past. And they say, how can I talk to my kid about this when I have all this baggage? And I would just say, that's the beauty of the gospel. The beauty of the gospel is you're not defined by your past, right? The grace of God covers you. And if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you say, hey, I messed this up, but God has redeemed it. And this is how He's redeemed it. And He's going to redeem you in your story. But if we can help you avoid some of the pitfalls that I've experienced in my story, I'd love to help you with that. And here's what God says about that. And again, just appeal to God's Word, to His authority. And that's going to require you to know, what does God's Word say about sex? And I'll just say to you, right now in our culture, everything the culture says is 180 the other direction from what God's Word says. And so you have to learn God's Word so that you're not just saying, well, I think you ought to do this, and I think you ought to do it this way, and I think you ought. That's just not going to go very well when you're trying to train up your kids. You've got to know what God's Word says about sexuality.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, just to keep telling your kids, like, God's heart for you is so good and so pure. He wants the best for you. And I made mistakes in my past, but let's do it God's way. Like what I pray for you as my child, I want God's best for your life. And so that means to know His best, you have to obey Him. In the hard areas of life that are like he said, totally opposite of what the culture says is what you should do. Like you've got to choose to stand out, and you want that for your kids. Like I loved hearing that advice. Sometimes somebody said that they prayed for their kids that they would be unpopular. And I thought, wow, you don't really think through that because you want them to fit in. But you want them to stand out as different, that there's a joy about them, that there's something different, that they stand for different values. And that's a good thing. And this is an area you want them to stand differently than the world.
Yeah, that's really good, Barie. And then finally, we just want to encourage you, be open and honest with your kids. And if there's an area they're asking you about that you feel uncomfortable answering, say, hey, I feel uncomfortable answering that right now. Let me think about how to answer that, and I'll give you the answer later. Don't lie to them. Okay? Don't make up something that's not true. The number of stories I have heard from people that are our age, we're 40, people that are our age, about what their parents told them about sex because they didn't want to have the conversation, will make you laugh out loud because it's so ridiculous.
Or not only that, they don't tell them about their past. So we've had kids who are like, when they get older, and trust me, your kids are going to get of the age where they're going to be able to do the math and know if you had them before you were married. So if you're telling your kids, oh, you can't have sex until you're married, and da-da-da, okay, that's truth. But you want to own your past before they do the math in their head and they're like, wait a second, you're telling me this, but you want to just be honest at the front and not make up some crazy stories. I say call this stuff body parts by their names, because when you have a teenager in the house and you're calling body parts noo-noos and I don't know, ho-hos or whatever, it's just really awkward. And they're not going to take you seriously as an expert. So I'm just, all of you out there who really love to like come up with creative names for the body parts, I'm just going to challenge that a little bit and say it gets a little bit harder as they get older. So just start them out with
just call them the right biological names, what the anatomical parts are, absolutely. And just answer their questions honestly and openly. And we just want to encourage you that you can do it. You know, dads, get with your sons, have these conversations. Don't put it on your wife. Say, hey, would you talk to our son about this? No, you as a man, man up and have that hard conversation. Moms, sit down with your daughters, have these conversations. Not saying dads can't speak into daughters' lives and moms can't speak into sons' life. They can. But I just want to encourage you, take the lead with the children that are the same gender as you so that you can share from your experience very openly and honestly with them as they are asking you pointed questions.
Go ahead.
Well, and I was just going to say, the reason that's so important is because, listen, and I hope even by just sharing these books and these resources and these topics with you, that we leave you with this big point. This is not one conversation.
No.
It's a big mistake to say, like, well, I had the sex talk, okay? There is no sex talk. There are many sex talks along the way. And so, again, taking the lead, starting that conversation. I just had one with our oldest son this weekend, and you just keep having these conversations as they mature and they see things and they experience things and they have questions about things. You keep the conversation going.
Yeah. I just remember a big win, or what I thought was a win for me as a parent, was when I took one of ours to their 11-year checkup. And I think it's at that checkup where the doctor will ask, is there anything you want to ask me that you want your parent to step out of the room? So that's when they start kind of getting into the sexual questions and stuff. And Cade looked at the doctor funny and was like, why? So it was Cade, because he said, why? And his doctor was like, well, if there's anything that you just feel uncomfortable talking to her about. And he kind of laughed. He's like, they talk to us about sex all the time. So no, I can talk in front of her. And I just left thinking, wow, that's a win, after we had a laugh about it.
Absolutely.
So may that be your story too.
Yeah. We love you. We want you to just really encourage you. You can do it. Okay, Mom and Dad, get into this conversation with your kids. Be courageous, and God will really bless you while you do it. We love you. Have a great day.